Let's talk about API integration. So we know how to build APIs that we are providing. Now let's talk about how to consume other APIs. So you begin by coming to your business flow section and creating a node for web service. Here it is. Now, any web service, any external web service that you want to call, you must declare it here because system needs to know what is the web service URL. So let's give it a name. What is the URL that we should call? So you need to provide a URL. For example, HTTPS. When you declare what kind of service it is, it's SOAP, POST, GET, PUT, or ATTACH. These are the ones which are supported right now. So let's say it's a POST API. Then you can choose what kind of compression you want to use when calling, and you can pick a value which the target API supports. So let's say we can use gzip. How the values would be sent, let's say JSON. How we would receive, let's say again JSON. And XML namespace if XML is involved. And username password is an old form of API authentication which is not used anymore. So chances are, if there's an authentication with this API, you would be handling it differently, and this is not used anymore. And then you can see. So now we know, or the system knows, that there is an API like this that is there in the system, and now we can call it. We can use it in our program. So when you want to call this again, you just drag and drop it into the code builder, and you will get the option of async call and a sync call. So as you know, when you call a service, you can call it synchronously or asynchronously. So let's look at the asynchronous call. So when you call anything asynchronously, you provide the name of the web service node, and then you provide an input parameter and an output parameter, which means what will be sent to the API. So let's say in this case, well, we can take anything from here. So the contents of this node would be formatted as declared in this structure. It will be put as JSON. It will use gzip compression, etc., etc. I'll use a post service. And whatever the response, you can capture it anywhere. I'm just randomly using some nodes here. They may or may not be the right ones, just to demonstrate how the calling is done. So it's simple. Call this API, pass this data, and whatever comes, put it back here. It's as simple as that. So if it comes as JSON or XML or whichever other format system knows, it will break it down and reconstruct the structure that is there in your schema. And when you call asynchronously, you are allowed to write a little code snippet which gets executed when this service finishes. So here I can put anything, and it's okay to leave it blank as well because we don't do anything specific when we call this. And after doing asynchronous call, you have to execute a wait, because if you don't execute a wait, it's going to immediately start doing something else. With this, the response may not have arrived. And if that is your intention, that's fine. That means you can do some other uh, computation, some processing here. And when you're ready to wait for the results, you can do a wait. So typically, when you're doing a wait, you can wait for a specific service. So you can type the name of the service. You can give a timeout in seconds. So let's say wait for 10 seconds, and that's about it. If it doesn't return, just continue anyway. And so typically the way this thing is done is you can call multiple services. In this case, I'm calling the same service again, which doesn't make sense, but just for illustration. And then so both of them will be called asynchronously. And then I can say wait for all the services. So here it will wait until all the asynchronous services fired have completed. So at this point, I would have the result of both the service calls, and then I can continue my own processing. So this is if these services take some time, and I want to, I don't want to execute them sequentially, then I can issue all of them out at the same time, and then I am only waiting for the slowest API and not sequentially waiting for all of them. The other option is I can do a synchronous call. It's simple. There is no wait required. There's no complication. Just simply the name of the API, the node that you want to pass, and the response that you want to receive. It's really that simple. So sync call is more frequently used because invariably when you call something, you want the result to be available before you can proceed. But if you have a situation where you have multiple, more complex scenario where you have to call multiple services and consolidate their output, and you can execute them in parallel using the asynchronous call. So this is an introduction to how you integrate with other APIs. And here, all these commands are available directly as well. In our case, what we did is we got this generated by dragging the API into the code. We might just as well have just selected the command from here and put in the values on our own. So another note here. One is that if you want to call an internal API, so that means, let's say you are writing multiple services in your project, and you want one API to call another API which is a part of your own project, you still have to do this. You still have to create a web service node so the system knows how to call it. And the only difference being if you start the URL, okay, with a slash, that means you don't start with HTTP or HTTPS. It assumes that this is an internal call. So it will call back the same container where the current service is running. So it can be C slash. And rest of the stuff goes exactly how it works with the external APIs. So if you start your URL with a slash, system knows it's an internal call. That means it's going to call a service that it assumes is hosted in the same container where the current service is running. Another thing that perhaps you should know is that when you are configuring an outside API, sometimes it is useful to use a wizard. Now, any API that you're calling, there's several things you need to do. You need to capture the request and response structures in the schema. You need to define the API, the web service definition itself. So all this you can execute in a single step by using the wizard. So here what you do is you give the name, whatever, new service, the URL that you want to call, the headers you want to pass to it, and the request data you can provide here. And when you do that, it is going to call that service live. And show you the response in line. So once you put in these values and you say go, it's going to know the URL, it's going to know the request structure and the response structure from the response, and then you can say import. So it's going to create all the structures and the API definition in a single step. So this is a faster way to do it, a shortcut, so to say. You don't have to go through creating request, response, and APIs separately. But this is, of course, you can use if the service is live and you have access to it, then you can use this. So this is all about in the how to section for API integration. Thank you.